Our next perm that we're going to talk about is called a bricklayer perm wrap. It's exactly what it sounds like. The patterns that we use for laying bricks on a house is the same pattern we use for placing the perm rods. And I like to use the small rods for this simply because the smaller the rod, the easier it is to go around the curvature of the head. A wider rod would sit further out from the head, and the placement needs to be as close to the scalp as possible in order to have the best curl. What this helps with is someone, especially someone with finer hair, it keeps from having a set line that shows. In a basic perm wrap, when we do a basic, we perm just down to center and near, there's usually a line that sits in either side. Now for thick hair, it's not too big of a deal because it fills itself in. But in finer hair, once you have that line created, sometimes it's harder to get it out. This is much easier to hide all of the patterns that may have been put in place and make the hair look thicker and fuller. So it's really good for that. I like to do it for roller sets as well, especially with medium to fine hair. It works really good, and you don't have as much trouble getting the marks out. So what you want to do to start this perm wrap is section it off across the head from ear to ear. So you just have your front half and your back half. And you start in the apex, and you need to see the pattern that you do. You put your first rod in, and then you do two. You always start back in the center. So you go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Don't do your whole center first. You want to work it across as you're going. Don't worry if you don't pick up the hair all the way to the side, because your next row will pick it up for you. Main goal here is don't put in too much hair. Don't converge that hair, and don't worry about it if it doesn't reach. You'll get to it eventually. The other thing I see people do wrong is that they end up going in a U shape with this, and you want to follow it around from this shape. The most curvature you would like to see would be a half of a smile maybe, but you want to line them up. If you get them all going in one line, you're going back to a basic perm wrap. So start at your top with 1 and then 2. You always start in your center and work out, and that's the way you go from it. So you'll notice here's 1, every other one you have a rod that's looking very much like the one in front of it. So it's 1, then 2, 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 all the way down, and it works out. Now, you'll also see placement where I put a full-size rod. Why? Because we can't determine what the head shape's going to be. The hairline might be different. So I knew I didn't have enough room to put a small rod without it crunching and bunching, so you don't want to do that either, because you want that perm rod to lay as close to the scalp as possible so you get a better curl. So sometimes you would have to place a large rod just because of the way the hair fell, and that's what we've done here. After you complete the back section, you go to the front, and you'll notice here the rods are moving in this direction, and I didn't start with 1 in the center because it would have put me 2 rods back to back that were going in the same pattern, so we didn't want to do that. So in order to keep our bricklayer pattern moving, even when we went to the front, I started with the 2 rods instead of the 1. So we had 2 rods, then 1, then 2, then 1, then 2. Notice my final rod. The final rod in the front is long, and it's not split on purpose, because if I was to have the split rods on the very, very front, unless this client wears her hair sectioned down the center, she's going to have a hard time getting that line mark out of the head. So you want to have that wider section, and then it can work easier with it. I don't want it splitting right on the front of the hairline. So if you have to do 2 in a row just to keep that one from being split, that would be all right. But for the rest of it, you want to work in that same bricklay pattern. And you may find that yourself here, these 2 are very close. That's okay. Other thing I see that you have to be careful of, especially on your mannequin, is that when you take this rod out, you have that one little peak down here. It's still not wider than your tool. And that's what you want to be careful of when you're doing this, because if you go too wide, if I tried to add, if I'd done this in 1 rod instead of 2 rods, look at how much hair would have been placed in. And then that hair would have had to travel all the way up to that point before it started getting curls. So once it was processed and put down, that curl would have not started until it got all the way down to here. So the client would have felt like it wasn't a good perm. So you want to still take your proper width and section in your subsections. So that's a bricklayer perm wrap. That's a finished look. And the other thing I want to just quickly share with you is end rodding. When you're using a short rod, sometimes people like to brick lay. Some people like to use a bookend. Bookend meaning turn your paper in half. But watch what happens when you bookend many times. In order to get it in the paper, you'll see that hair move up and move in. When it does that, it's converged. Only many times people converge it much tighter. This is a strong conversion, and you don't want to do that. You're going to have a more even and consistent curl if you have that hair separated. So if you're doing 2 end wraps, what I like to do is when I'm behind my work in the top of the head, place my perm wrap on the back and spray. And then I place my other one in the front. And because it's already moist from where I just sprayed it, it grabs that end paper for me. So I don't have to worry about lining them up before I wet them. Place your perm rod. If the paper goes a little bit beyond it, it's okay. As long as the hair is still smooth and straight, that is not an issue at all. And then it goes in place. Same thing when you're working above your work. Show you this one. I'm standing over my work. So let's comb that hair out. Again, making sure that it's evenly distributed, not converged. Remember when I was at the top, I put my back paper first. When I'm standing over it, I put my front paper first. Spray it. Then position my second paper. See, it grabbed it because it was already wet. Make sure it's pulled past the ends so that the ends are going to be enclosed in the paper for control. And then place it in the rod. You'll have a lot better control of it when you do that, and you'll be able to move much quicker. So taking 2 papers and trying to line up 2 dry papers and line up the hair and then hold your water bottle, it's a little bit much. So it's a little bit easier if you just place that 1 paper, spray it, place your second paper, and it's grabbed, and then go, and make it much easier for you. So this is your brick layer perm wrap. I hope you have fun doing it, and thank you for learning today.